Go live? All right. Okay, a warm welcome to everyone who is listening in. I'm Megha, and I head the Children and Youth program here at the Greenlit Fest. So, 2023 is our third year as a festival, and this year we decided to dip our toes into global waters and have this initiative that we've called Literature Across Borders. So, what we did was back in 2022, we curated four pairs of books on environmental that explore environmental themes for young people, and four books by authors in India came to students here at Spa University in the UK, and four books by authors in the UK, which are sort of thematically related to the books from India, traveled to four students, actually more than four students, at Ashoka University in India. And over the last 4 months, we've had these dialogues with these students, and it's been so interesting to just, understand what happens when literature crosses over. Because very often literature from the West comes to India, but Indian literature doesn't quite make the journey that way. And it's been fantastic to learn from the students how they felt about reading books set in a different culture by authors from a different culture. What were the similarities in the writing and the plots? What were the differences? And how does this literature speak of the age of the Anthropocene when, human activities are having such a profound impact on our planet? So, two authors whose books were part of the pilot edition of our exchange, Shabnam Minwalla and Ranjit Lal, are here with me today. I am so delighted. And I don't exaggerate when I say that I think they are two of India's most loved children's authors. And it's been such a pleasure to have their books, The Six Spellmakers of Dorabjee Street. That's Shabnam's first book, in fact. And That Summer at Kalagarh, which was one of Ranjit's earlier books. It was published back in 2001, I think, Ranjit, if I'm not wrong. Uh, and I mean, I know that both of them don't really need an introduction for many people who might be listening in, but I'm going to introduce them nevertheless, a short introduction. So, Shabnam Minwalla is a Mumbai holic. She is best known as a chronicle of this magical and maddening city. And she has written a load of sort of award winning fiction for children and non fiction for adults set in Mumbai. Her latest book is Zen, which captures a short history of Mumbai and explores the lives of two Zainabs who lived in the city, one in 1935 and one in 2019. And Shabnam, I must say, I'm really keen on laying my hands on your next book. Ranjit Lal is interested in a lot of very different things: natural history, birds, dogs, automobiles, photography, cooking. He's the author of more than 40 books for children and adults who are happily still children. And Ranjit has got a bunch of honors. He's been awarded by IBI for his contribution to children's literature. And he's also, in 2009, been awarded the ZIAS Wildlife Lifetime Service Award for promoting actually the cause of wildlife, especially birds, through exceptional literary skills. Ranjit's latest book, I think it's his latest book because Ranjit, I mean, we have so many books and I'm always looking out for your books, but I think it's The Great Poop War, a sort of hilarious book that has just been published by Red Panda. And I'm sure his readers would be really keen to lay their hands on it. Before we proceed with the questions, we have readings that some of the students here did where they spoke about some of their favorite bits from the Six Spellmakers and That Summer at Kalagarh. So, can we play the readings, please?
It is the time where we first meet the garden. And you really get, I think I really just clicked with Nivi because Nivi loves fantasy books. And then when she goes into this garden, she's transported. And I've definitely felt that in nature myself, where you're just like, oh my gosh, this is like something from Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, and I'm in this magical world literally now. So the garden can be entered through a creaky metal gate, almost hidden under the luxuriant leaves and red blossoms of a Madhamulti creeper. Nivi took a deep breath and gave it a tentative push. The gate swung open invitingly. Nivi took a step forward and found herself amidst a confusion of birdsong and colour. There were exuberant bougainvilleas, fat orange ixorias, and cheery yellow alamanders. Pale ferns and bright creepers grew in joyful and chaotic abundance. A couple of trees spread out welcoming branches. Two beady-eyed bulbuls were perched on the brick wall. Some yellow butterflies floated about. As an avid reader of fantasy books, Nivi had often imagined how it must be to travel 100 years into the future, to be able to turn into a Pegasus or to cook up thunderstorms. But the fluttery, fizzy feeling that overtook her in this garden was even more magical. It took her a minute to realize that she was just very, very happy.
We have another reading from Ranjit's book, That Summer at Kalagarh. Can we play that, please?
A bit that really struck me, which is when the main character meets an elephant, and she has this real power, and she's this young girl of nearly 12, and these guards are scared of the elephant, and her cousins are scared of the elephant, but she's got this power. I'll read that. She put Avik down, but held him close, his face buried in her lap. She stared, unmoving as a boulder, as the huge bull elephant rounded the bend in a welter of spray, his enormous ears flapping dangerously. His trunk was already rolled up safely, and his tusks thrust outwards aggressively. His ebony body shone. Round that bend he rumbled like a runaway locomotive, and then spotted the schoolgirl standing stolidly in the middle of his path, glaring back at him. For a second, it looked as though he would be right onto her, but then, inexplicably, he skidded to a halt and surveyed the scene with cold, angry eyes. He tested the air with his trunk, apparently confused. Then he emitted another shrill trumpet and stomped one great front foot into the water, frustrated, but made no move. What I loved about this section was how impressive and powerful the elephant is. And then you get this schoolgirl able to stand there and face it. I think it's a really striking contrast between characters, and it's a really important part in the book because it's when they first meet, and we've had this idea all along that she has connection and a connection with elephants. And I thought it was a really special moment that we actually get her to see her meeting it, and showing such strength of character as well.
All right. So, yes, those were some of the bits. We had some more readings for the books, and I'm just very glad for whatever happened. But before I proceed, Alexia Casal, who is the course leader for the MA Writing for Young People program at Bath Spa, is here with us. Can we have Lexi on the screen, please? Lexi, would you like to have a few words about the exchange? Just generally take us through your experience briefly this year. And if you have any questions for Ranjit and Shabnam.
Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here, and I don't want to take away time from the wonderful discussion that will follow, but I just wanted to say what an honour it is and a privilege it's been for me and for all of our students to work with you, these wonderful authors in the UK and in India, and our colleagues at Ashoka University with Dr. Phillips. It's very difficult sometimes in literature to not be isolated to your own country's literature. And even when you're trying to look for books in translation, having the ability to talk to other people around the world about how is publishing, how is writing, how is reading, what are those experiences, it just makes all the difference. And when it comes to issues like wildlife in nature, and especially the environmental crisis that we're all experiencing, we can't be isolationist. We have to work together and speak together. And so not only is that a pleasure, it's an urgent issue. So I think being able to give that to our students is wonderful. So our students are MA students who are writing literature or seeking to get published, writing literature for children 0 to 18, so children and young people. And on the Ashoka side, we've been pairing with students who are MA English literature. So it's a slightly different thing, but that's just enriched what we've done even more. So I don't want to go on. I just want to say thank you so much. It's such a great honour to be here. And I just wondered if, before we go into sort of the other questions, if we could hear from our wonderful authors a little bit about how have your books been received around the world, and how has that particularly changed and been different in different countries in relation to the issue of wildlife, nature, and the environment? If there are sort of different international flavours to that, it would be lovely to know a bit about that.
So, should we have Ranjit go first or Shabnam? Shabnam is nicely muted herself, I see. So it's almost as if she's egging on, Ranjit to speak first.
Well, I don't know about international readership or acceptance at all, but I basically just write based on experience in India. I mean, Kalagarh was based on a trip to Kalagarh, and we saw the dam and the lake and what it had done. And on another trip to Corbett, we were actually confronted by a tusker while we were on foot. We were not meant to be on foot. And I just looked at this animal and looked at the machan that we were sort of supposed to be on and said that this guy can reduce this thing to matchwood in a blink of an eye if he wants to. So, so that's where the story sort of started from. But I really don't know about the acceptance abroad and all that, because when you read royalty statements from the publishers, you can't make head or tail of what they're saying.
Yes.
So, totally agree. You cannot tell anything about even how many books have been sold. So it just sort of goes into one corner of the email box and lives there, I think. But like Ranjit, I too don't really know how my books have been received abroad. I think Six Spellmakers, I do know that a school in Pakistan read it as a reader. And schools around India have been, using it as a reader or for book clubs. So that I do know. And occasionally I get an email from a little girl in California or one little girl in the UK saying that they enjoyed the book and they really wish they could climb the Bimli trees as well. And I totally get it, because as a little girl, I climbed Bimli trees and I wish everybody could.
Yeah. No, actually, I think Lexi, I was just talking to Shabnam and Ranjit. I think just simply the tradition of English publishing in India itself is far more recent when compared to, I think, English publishing in the UK. In many ways, you could say the UK has been the cradle of English publishing around the world. So what is interesting is very often we have writers who are very well received in India and who are read widely, but we have absolutely no idea of how these books are traveling abroad and how people are receiving them, if at all they are. So it's I think that was in fact one of the driving impulses for this initiative, to actually see for ourselves what happens when literature, at least curated literature, makes that journey. And it's been fantastic, what your students have done with the books, and just hearing from them. I'm so glad that they've enjoyed the books from whatever I've made of the dialogues. And I don't know what they've come back to you with, but I've really had a lot of fun speaking to them about these books.
Well, it's fascinating to hear that because, as you say, we didn't have a sense of that. So doing this project, it's clearly filling a gap. So that's actually very interesting to hear that the answer is, I don't really know, because it sort of justifies what we're doing and the plans we have for the future. So thank you very much for sort of giving us that moment to sort of reflect on that. And I'm just so keen to hear the answers to the more in-depth student questions. I don't want to take up the time from them, but thank you for this wonderful experience for all of us.
And it's also interesting, but some of the authors in the UK as well don't really know how their books are being received in India at all. I mean, I have this year, because of the course, I've sort of spoken to a lot of people who are kind of clueless about children's publishing in India and are not. I mean, India is a very big English books market. I mean, 10% of India is a very, very large number in terms of people because it's a very populous country. But there is very little idea in terms of how these books are being received there. So I think that's been very interesting for me as well to get a sense of that. But I think now we have a bunch of questions, and without dealing any further, I'm going to jump right into them. These are questions that have come in from readers. These are questions that have come in from some of the students, Shabnam and Ranjit, and some, of course, have come from me in the course of doing the dialogue. So I'm going to start off with a more general question. Um, you know, um, Sorry, if Lexi needs to be on stage, she can. Otherwise, Ganesh, it can just be me and Ranjit and Shabnam. Yeah. Okay. So these were some of your early books, Shabnam, this was your first book, The Six Spellmakers of Dorabjee Street. And Ranjit, I think this was that summer at Kalagarh was one of your early books, wasn't it?
The very first book for children.
I see. Fascinating. And I am actually going to start by asking you what sort of made you gravitate towards exploring, an environmental theme in these books. I think I'm going to ask Shabnam first because, Shabnam, Ranjit has written a ton of books on wildlife thereafter.
Yeah.
But I think your stories have been, I think this was probably your only book which has sort of looked or sort of explored this theme. So I'm going to ask you what made you do it in your first book.
So I think I'm an accidental writer for children. It happened, it was not intended at all. And when I decided to write this book, it actually came out from an incident involving my daughter's ballet class that made me very angry. So I came up with the villain of the story first. And then I started wondering and I decided, okay, this is going to be a story with children on one side and these two rather crotchety old ladies on the other side. And what would they fight about? And I think the answer that came to me was the Bimli trees, because the Bimli trees played a very huge role in my childhood. When I was a kid, 9, 10, 11, 12, I spent an inordinate number of hours sitting on the branches of these two trees with my friends from the lane. And that was just what we did in summer. We would climb these trees, we would irritate the neighbors, we would eat bimlis, fall very ill, irritate our mothers too, and gossip and giggle and peep and just behave badly. But those trees were a huge part of my life. And unfortunately, so after about 4 or 5 years of loving those trees, I grew up and I became a college girl and I started loving high heel shoes and mini skirts more. But the trees remained a friend, but a high bye kind of friend after that. Many years later, I was a student doing my master's in Los Angeles. And something really strange happened. I was at a party in LA and a boy, an Indian boy, and I promise you, I had never seen him before, ever. And I never saw him after. But he stormed up to me in the middle of this party and he said, "Why did you cut down those trees?" And I thought he was a loony. I was really scared, and all my friends gasped and we all shrank away. Turned out that this boy lived one lane away from my building, and he had realized, he must have come down in summer or whatever, he realized that the two bimli trees had been cut down. I didn't believe him. I really thought he was just, I don't know, unhinged. I wrote a long letter to my mother. This was the day before email. My mother wrote a long letter back, and a month later, I had the horrific news that a very cross neighbor in our building had decided to cut down the trees because she didn't like it that the neighborhood children used to climb the trees and pluck the bimleys. It disturbed her afternoon sleep. It devastated me. It absolutely horrified me. And I think when I was so I didn't plan to write this book for children, but I was going home and thinking, I'm going to make this woman a villain and I'm going to have children on one side and I'm going to write this book. And what will they fight about? And the answer was utterly obvious to me. They have to fight about the Bimli trees. And I couldn't save them in real life, but maybe I can save them in fiction and sort of give them a new lease of life.
Yes, I mean, I think that's really lovely. I the older I grow, the more I realize that one of the best bits about being human and living this life is the strange things that we somehow, the ways in which, providence works and how things that are meant to happen.
No,
It's almost
absolutely.
the unpredictability of it is what keeps it exciting sometimes, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
And I have a
that,
tiny footnote. May I just add it then? Well, so for years, I never saw another Bimli tree again, though they're very common in Karnataka and Goa. And people would say, I have a Bimli tree in my compound in Bandra, come and visit it. But I never did. And then a few weeks ago, my daughters are doing this tree project in Mumbai where they are cataloging all the trees. And we went to a park and they were looking at the more glamorous trees, ghost tree and baobab and all of that. And I kept looking at this little tree and thinking that is so pretty. And when I went close, I realized it was a Bimli tree and I'm going to visit it often. So,
okay, that's really nice. And maybe we'll have more Bimbli trees in your upcoming work, Shabnam. Um, Ranjit, without much ado, I mean, you've written just so many books, but if this was your first book for children, what sort of was it like a conscious choice that I want to write on wildlife for children? And from there it came, or was it almost inorganic?
Well, it's actually based on a visit to Kalagarh that we made, and we did trek through the jungle, along a stream and all that, and never saw any elephants on that trip. But I had seen, as I told you, I had seen elephants earlier in Corbett. So, I mean, the two things sort of just clicked. I said, I've always been interested in wildlife and nature and all that, even though having been brought up in Madras and Bombay, which are not exactly. Madras was very nice because at that time there was just huge gardens and you could just run around, climb trees, discover which ants would bite you and which would not. So all that was there. And then Bombay did have the Borivali National Park and the beach. And at the time I was there, the beaches were deserted. So I mean that was just part of our sort of upbringing kind of a thing. That was part of what we did. And so this story sort of just came about. I just thought that what if there is we do have this connection with animals. Anybody who's kept a dog or a cat or anything will know that they look at you and you know exactly what maybe they are thinking and what you're thinking. So, I mean, there is that connection and all that. And even with elephants, I mean, now there's that lovely documentary, Elephant Whisperers, that we've seen, that won that award. So there is a connect, and I think it's very important for young people to realize that there is a connection, and they're the ones that we have to catch and sort of, well, I wouldn't say brainwash, but just tell them that look, if you treat animals well, or just look after them, I mean, they're gonna take, they'll be all right with you. I mean, I've had a pair of bulbuls nesting in the bougainvillea just outside my room, and I haven't photographed them at all, and I don't look at them exceptionally. I mean, I think the young ones have just flown, but you do not disturb, you don't intrude into their privacy kind of thing at all. And my whole attitude is, they're bulbuls in Delhi. Delhi, I'm cheek by jowl by the ISPT, interstate bus terminal. They are used to noise and chaos. So, but just don't change your routine. What you've been on doing, you continue doing, they will not be bothered. But the moment they realize they're under scrutiny, they're going to get upset. So, that is a relationship you sort of, it's like, the paparazzi following Diana, Princess Diana. I haven't
Ah,
taken any pictures of that at all. Because I mean, you notice it with crows. The moment you take an interest in them, they are aware of that. They said that, what is this guy up to? He's got something on his mind, and we better be watchful. So, you realize that, and that's just by observing. So, I mean, that's how this story came about. That, what if this girl is, you could say, the spirit of the elephant that had, died or whatever. I mean, this is how she would react. And it just, the whole plot is just to sort of, excite children. So that's how it sort of came about. And I much prefer writing for youngsters. It's much more fun. And I mean, it just comes to me. I just like it much more than writing for adults. Actually, even Crow Chronicles, my first book, which was
Yes.
meant for adults, a friend of mine came to me and said, my 11-year-old son loved that book. So I said, wow, you know. So
Yes.
it sort of it works like that. It just that's what I sort of like doing.
I think this classification of sometimes, these sort of very hard binaries that we draw between children's literature and
Exactly.
literature for adults is problematic. I think as an adult, I enjoy children's books, not just because I work in children's publishing, but because I just genuinely enjoy reading these books. And I know, like my grandma, now I've got a lot of the oldies in my family hooked to children's books because they find it so much easier. Sometimes it's for very, utilitarian reasons like, oh, the font is bigger,
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of distance between the lines, but they just truly relish some of these works. And what's really interesting, I think, about both of your sort of books is that they're informed by a very clear sensibility. Like Ranjit, I know when you talk of things like which ants will bite and which won't. It's already speaking of this interest. I'm not sure Shabnam would have gone exploring such things in her younger days, especially if she's vouching to high heels and mini skirts. I don't think ants would be anybody's best friends in that attire. But is it true that then one can say that because you write so much? I mean, almost I think most of your books, Shabnam, are set in Mumbai, and Ranjit, most of your books are around are set in sort of wild natural landscapes. Um, I mean, not all, but most of them. So,
Yeah.
I mean, do you really think as writers, settings or the places that we have such a strong sort of association with really actually end up informing our work, and probably we do our most authentic writing when we sort of base our narrative in these settings? Do you think it will be hard if you were to step out of these landscapes? And I think I'm going to, Ranjit, ask you that question because you've spoken very much about living in cities, Madras and Bombay, and now you're in Delhi where you're observing the pair of bulbuls. But but still you're sort of writing about these very wild landscapes. So I'm just interested in asking how your own sort of environment influences the settings in your books.
I think for me, I'm a Bombayite actually because I lived 15 years. I did school and college in Bombay.
I
So
see.
even now, after 40 years in Delhi, I feel more at home in Bombay than I do in Delhi. When I land in Bombay, I said, "Wow, back home," kind of a thing. And it's been 40 years in Delhi, and that feeling is not there. But I think maybe I choose these out of place locations again to interest children. That there's more than just the city and just your internet and just your video games and all that you can get interested in if you go to these places and sort of visit them and just be there. I mean, we all do that. We all run away to the hill stations in summer and in the holidays. Why? And yet over there also we want our TV and our this and our that. You just step out and see what's there on offer, and I mean you will be amazed. So maybe it's also a form of escapism because that's what I enjoy doing and going to these places and all that. But I that's why I set my books in these sort of places. And the other thing is I always set them in a fictitious location usually because then you are in charge of the geography. Because then exactly, nobody can fight and say, that tree was not there or that building was not there or that street was not there because I mean it's So that's what I enjoy it because that's where I like to be. I think maybe it's also a reflection of where I would rather be
Yeah.
than in a city like Delhi. Whenever I go to these hill stations, I would keep asking myself, why the hell does one come back to Delhi? What for? I mean, it's so cool. I mean, are you nuts or something like that?
Yeah, I think, Sir Ranjit, what's so, sir, I mean, because I lived as well. I did my schooling and I studied till 12th standard. From I think 8th to 12th, my father was working in Mumbai. And
Okay,
honestly, I mean, even though I was born in Delhi, my dad has had a transferable job. So we've lived all over India and then all over the world. But, it's interesting, this thing about Delhi, once you've been to Mumbai and lived there, I think it's just called it just becomes a part of you. The city really grows on you in
yeah,
amazing ways. So I can completely understand that. But from what you're saying, it's more of a deliberate choice also in a way to write about these landscapes in your
yeah,
instance. I don't think that's the case with you, Shabnam. I think for you it's just you are a Bombay person and the city
Yeah,
is your muse, very, very obviously. So you know,
yeah. Top to bottom, I would say, yeah, every single book I've written has been a Bombay, Mumbai book. And I was a journalist for 10 years. So, in a way, my approach to writing is a bit journalistic. It's quite, there's fantasy. There are obviously spellmakers, fantasy element, but the geography is very, I may change a few names, but everybody who knows the city will recognize the buildings, even will recognize the street corners. And I think when I started writing books for children, there were a couple of things I wanted to do with the books. Thing one was I felt my memories as a child, and sometimes when I watched my children in a school setting or in a setting filled with adults, they felt a bit powerless. They felt a bit lost in a world, like pawns in a world being sort of managed by adults. And so I really wanted the books to give them the sense of power, the sense that you can also change things. The other thing I think that I felt very strongly was that I really wanted them to look at the world around them. And I remember when I was a child, I used to go to my mom and say, please, can we go to England for a holiday? Please. And she would say, well, we were certainly not in that category of people who could hop onto a flight and go to England. She would say, but why? Why this desperation? And I would say, because I want to sit on the wishing chair. I want to meet Mr. Pink Whistle. I want to visit Faraway Tree because I was an Enid Blyton girl entirely. And in my mind, very clearly, magic and adventure lived far away. It didn't live in Mumbai, didn't live among the grey buildings of my childhood. And I felt very deprived of that magic. And growing up, you realize there's magic everywhere. And that is what I really wanted to tell my readers that there is adventure, look around you. And so when I started, my books are very rooted in my immediate environment because there's just so much wonder. The natural environment, the built up environment is there in a book like What Maya Saw, which is like a clue hunt around the city. Or
yes.
I don't know, the environment of ideas and views, which is there in Zen, where you see a world which is getting more and more vitiated by anger and biases and prejudices. And the fact that you can challenge that in some ways. And so I really wanted to recreate the everyday for my readers.
But I also actually that brings me to the next question, which is, as writers writing in English in India, what do you make of English literature coming in from the UK? And are there, particular authors whose work you really enjoyed? Ranjit, maybe we'll come back to you for that question. And Shabnam has already given us a sneak peek into some of it in her last reply. But yeah, uh, Ranjit.
well, we all grew up reading Enid Blyton and all those Hardy Boys and stuff like that. And I mean, the plot was always there, and of course, all the biases that were sort of hidden amongst the books, which you didn't really realize. But one what did realize was that people like Enid Blyton used to go on and on about it was a bright and sunny day. Now it's a bright and sunny day almost every day in India. And what are these potted meat and things like that? Never heard of them. Of course, you ask your parents, can we have this and can we have that? And they say, what are you talking about? But So even now, if you go to a children's bookshop here in India, in the majority of the authors are foreign, are from abroad. The Indian authors, at least till a few years ago, used to be stocked near the bathroom.
Oh God.
So I hope it's. I haven't been for a long time,
No, I
but
have been to bookstores. I think the more sort of conscientious ones are
there's
now
no changing.
are
Yeah,
keeping a very good stock of Indian children's literature. I think
yeah,
the other thing is also, I think Ranjit, Indian children's literature also doesn't have a very long history. I mean, in my own personal experience,
yeah, yeah. It has,
I think I have really seen it pick up only after 2010 in many ways, you know. I
yeah,
think the last decade, it's really, you see it a lot more than you were even seeing it back in the day.
yeah,
But, I'm going to actually, instead of posing the same question to you, Shabnam, since Ranjit spoke about the biases, and there's been this very sort of raging discussion about going back and correcting the books and doing away with all the biases in the writing.
Mm.
What do you make of that? Is it necessary? I mean, is it? I mean, what would you feel if somebody goes back and probably wants to correct some sort of bias that they spot in your book, ages back? Like, I'm just very interested in whether we need to go back and re-edit these books.
So it's a confusing topic, right? I mean, you don't want biases to creep in. So I'll tell you about Enlightenment and my daughters. So when they started reading, I tried to force feed them the books I had read as a child. And there was a lot of resistance, okay? I wanted them to read Indian books. I brought books for them from around the world, but I felt these books you must read. They're wonderful. And no, they just were not reading them, a lot of them. And then of all the Indian writers, only read Mallory Towers and St. Clair's. So I was a bit intrigued. Why not Secret Seven? Why not Famous Five? Why not Magic Faraway Tree? And they said something really interesting to me. They said, have you noticed that in all those books, it's the boys who have the adventures and it's the girls who stay home when mummy is ill? And if there is a girl who asserts herself in any way, she is considered the troublemaker, the George, the odd one out, the one who, storms around and spoils the adventure. And we want none of it. So St. Clair's and Mallory Towers is safe. It's a girls' world. So the girls will have the adventures and they will have the unpleasant aspects. So we can stomach that. So these are biases I hadn't even noticed as a child. So of course the world changes and of course perceptions change. And yeah, I mean, when you talk about Gollywog and all, which is so everywhere in those books, I think it's nice to remove certain words. But I have read a few sanitized versions of old books that I love. And I actually felt they lost some of their punch and kick. It just could be nostalgia speaking here. It's difficult, okay? I would feel very sad if somebody went back and sanitized my books. But then if I have inadvertently hurt someone and I honestly didn't mean to hurt that person, then maybe it's a good thing. So I have no one view on this. Sorry.
Interesting. Are there any sort of contemporary writers from here that you probably be aware of, or whose work you might have come across in recent times, Shabnam and Ranjit? I mean, it's okay if you haven't. I'm just curious to ask you.
writing for children.
Yes.
There's Bijal.
Yeah. But
Bijal
I'm
was
talking about.
uh, in the old times there was Arkinaran. That's the Swami, and I think that was our equivalent of the Williams series, Richard Crompton's Williams series.
Yeah, I was. Are there any?
Marguerite stories. I remember
Yeah.
reading those a long time ago in school or something like that. But I recently reread Anita Desai's book, Village by the Sea, while I was in Goa. And that was a very simple story. I mean, it was a bit gloomy and all that when it started off and all that. And I was wondering now, I mean, is this going to get better or not? And it did sort of, improve, get more cheerful and all that. But again, very simply written and nicely written. And ironically, I mean, incidentally, Anita Desai used to live in the same building as we did in Bombay. And I, I was just getting into writing, and I used to wonder, she must be there on the second floor, sitting in her bedroom and writing away at this time, kind of a thing. So, I mean, It was, but otherwise there have been now there are, I think, more writers coming up and all that. But one trend that I have sort of seen is that they all doing rewrites of the Ramayana or the Mahabharata. They're rewriting these things in their own way. And I mean, we know those stories. Come up with something completely fresh, new, relevant to the current situation that you're in. But it's just some of the historical fiction is very good, and they're about people that you or rulers that you never really knew about, and so those are all right. But there's too much of this regurgitating of the Ramayana and Mahabharata and all that goes on.
Yeah, but
Needs
are
to be,
there? Sorry to intrude and
yeah.
uh,
uh,
interject, but are there any contemporary writers from the UK whose work you might be familiar with back in India? Either of you? I mean, I'm just
yeah.
yes,
Children's fiction.
writing children's fiction.
I read a lot of UK adult fiction. That is the bulk of my reading. But people like Hilary Mantel and Kate Atkinson, Sarah
Yes.
Waters. I'm just the biggest fan. They create the most magical landscapes and worlds, and I can slip into them very easily. Contemporary, I don't read that much children's writing actually outside India. I read a lot of the Indian stuff that comes out, but outside, not so much. I mean, I'm thinking. I think I'm a great fan of Rebecca Stead, but I have a feeling she's American. Um, I, yeah, I don't even look at the nationality actually when I pick up
I
a
know
book.
that's the thing, you don't really. I mean, it's one of those things. But yeah, I mean, it was just a question to understand because probably better put to children in school libraries. I think this question, who are probably keeping track. But yeah, I mean, I do sense that in the adult space, the travel is a bit easier than in the children's space. Simply because I think it's very new. Everything is very new about this field in India specifically. But on that note, we have somebody who's been following the dialogue, Simrita. She's here. Can we have her on screen? She had a question for both of you, and since she's been following the dialogue, I thought it's a good time to have her come on and ask you a question. Simrita?
I, I, you can hear me
Yes,
clear?
there's a slight echo,
Uh,
but
First of all, though, I mean, I think uh, it's amazing the number of adults that I know who like children's literature. Like Megha was saying, maybe it's a very utilitarian thing, but I think writing for children and making a lot of very, very complex topics very accessible is a skill which is not very easy. So, for example, we had to learn about nature through very complex poems. Then you have the two of you describing how children interact with nature in very short, accessible, easy sentences, and that's I think that's amazing. Um, I actually wanted to talk, and this is a question that I had for Ranjit because when I was reading his book, and I just, when Megha said that it was written in 2001 is when I went and saw because I thought that it was probably written very recently. Most plot lines, especially adventure books for kids, have very quantifiable villains. There is always a very, very good guy and a very bad guy, and there's always this thing, right? Uh, but that summer at Kalagarh doesn't really have a tangible villain in that sense, right? Plus, your plot also I thought was very interesting because initially I thought, okay, is this a book about bullying? Is this a book which is going to have a redemption arc? And then there is this, you're suddenly thrown into one massive adventure where they come across a rogue elephant. And then I thought, okay, now it's going to escalate. There's going to be a bigger adventure. They're going to probably come across a herd of elephants, right? And suddenly there's a twist in the story, and it goes in a way which I mean, I don't want to say spoilers here, right? But yeah, and so and you said that at the beginning, Renji, that you wanted to talk about maybe a child who can capture the spirit of nature, the creature in nature. And was this a very conscious choice and deliberate choice to make your plot line like this without having, uh, like I said, a quantifiable villain or going into deep, deep adventures in the thing? Like, what was the thought? I know you've said this that it was based on your experience and everything, but when you're writing for children, we generally have this entire thing that okay, let's take them to the peak of an adventure and then resolve it, right? And so just
Well,
very. Hmm.
I think the villain in the book is basically what we have done to a place like Corbett by flooding that forest and driving out all the animals, which is what we never think of. I mean, in India, I mean, you can go to jail for 7 years if you kill a peacock or any animal which is on your, but you can drown the whole forest and nothing happens. I mean, that's part of what I wanted to sort of bring out, that there's this huge thing that goes on, and for children, the one way I thought of making the connection was making this girl be part of the spirit of that elephant that sort of died, trying to rescue that little baby elephant or whatever. So that was the hook kind of a thing. But the main thing is that to make them aware that this is what we are doing to we're going on with it. I mean, they're building expressways through national parks and stuff like that. Nobody bats an eyelid. I mean, you don't talk about all the animals that you kill on the way, but you knock over a peacock by mistake and you're in for 7 years. I mean, that is the villain of the story, really, and that's what I sort of wanted to bring up. And the bullying and all that, of course, with their boys and this is a girl, then there's going to be friction or whatever. And so that was just sort of a side, because on the side kind of a thing.
In
And
fact, sorry if I'm going to again interject bad manners, but there is, in fact, a question very similar to what this whole bullying idea, Ranjit, that has that had come up from someone. It says that you begin that summer at Kalagarh with this episode of fat shaming, and you have this character, this young girl, you've given her elephantine grace. So, ever was there ever a concern that you're playing with the obvious in a novel about elephants, to have a character with elephantine grace and who's bullied for being Hathini? She's called Hathini. She's called a female elephant by her cousins.
well,
But
she
yet
was a
she's
little.
very powerful and empowered character. I'm just wondering whether you were ever worried that you were playing on the obvious in.
Yeah, but then it went a little more than the obvious, because
Yes.
she was actually you could say the spirit or whatever of that elephant. Actually she was that, because she recognized. And so, I mean, I had to sort of build up. I couldn't have a skinny girl uh, sort of be be sort of a reincarnation of an elephant, because that wouldn't work. So, I mean, this I was a little aware of, that. Yeah, people would cotton on very quickly that what's happening here, but it had to go a little beyond that, because it was more what happened to that elephant. The tragedy that overcame that elephant because of this the cloudburst or whatever, and the dam and the forest being flooded. So that was the sort of intention behind it.
I mean, I must say that always having been chubby every throughout my life, I have loved books which have fat characters, and I have hated the ones where the girls will be pretty and dainty and beautiful creatures, because I'll never be able to relate to them. But give me a fat girl any day. I love
They're the,
that.
they're the happiest people, frankly, honestly. They're
I
the
don't know
most.
whether you agree, Smrita,
No,
but
no.
she's
No, but it's nice to see, and I think it was interesting to see that the bullying aspect of it got left quite early on in the story, because I was first wondering. The plot actually quite interested me because, like I said, it's a very unpredictable plot. Even though you make very obvious references to her being graceful like the
Connection.
elephant,
yes.
yeah, yeah. But it catches you unaware. It still catches you unaware.
So I have a question for Shabnam now from Sarah Dyers at Bath Spa. And so Shabnam, she says the Six Spellmakers is told through an omniscient point of view, which she always finds very difficult when she's writing. So she's asking you if you have any sort of tips for those who are writing novels with this omniscient narrator. Maybe you could kind of tell our audience a little bit about this omniscient narrator, because it seems like a very literary term to use, and maybe somebody watching might not be entirely aware of what it means.
Yeah. So, actually hadn't realized that six Spellmakers had an omniscient narrator because I just wrote. I didn't think about what my narrator was like, whether the narrator was up close with a single character or up there. Uh, I, okay, so when I started Six Spellmakers, I had two options, whether to adopt this particular voice or whether to do a first person account through Nivi. And I found the third person easier. And so I took a step back and I tried to not be very close to a single character, primarily because there are four children who have this adventure. And though in my mind and my head, Nivi is maybe the character I felt closest to, all of them play a critical role. So I wanted a slightly step back narrator who could slip in and out of the heads of the various characters as well as the heads of the villains, because I did feel that sometimes villains make the most interesting characters, right? I do feel that their thought process can be very entertaining, very edifying, and very scary. So I wanted to be able to enter their heads as well. And so I think that is why I did this slightly stepped back narrator voice. Advice for somebody who's writing, I think the voice will come naturally depending on the story. I do think that it just happens. It just happens to fit your plot. But if you are using, I think, this kind of technique, then even if you slip in and out of heads, I think one scary thing is then you feel compelled to slip into every head in that scene. Okay, so suppose I have my four main characters and I'm talking about what's happening. So I'm talking from above in a way. And then I go into maybe the head of Sarita or Venu. I maybe because they have the interesting thought. And then I don't have to go into the head of every character and feel I owe it to every character to say this is what he was thinking, this is what she was thinking, this is what Mrs. Kotadia was thinking, and this is what the Bimli tree was thinking. I mean, that just would be overkill. So I think you have to be very careful when you use that to just move into the heads which at that moment are pushing the plot forward.
Right. So it's,
But
I think,
honestly, it just came instinctively, I would say.
I think there is something to probably be said about being very conscious about decisions like which narrator you want to adopt. Like, I think the best thing is to just get into it and see what voice is coming out naturally then. I think that's a, but it can be
Yeah.
tricky, yes. An omniscient narrator is always um, kind of tricky. But Ranjit, the question for you again, I mean, I think this is a good way of kind of wrapping up things on our end, is, you often write novels which have animal protagonists. And there is a question on, what writing advice would you have for writers who are working with the non-human as their protagonist, in the novel? um, if you have any writing tips on how to keep that authentic, because as humans probably our understanding is limited to human understanding. So when we take on the voice of an animal or some other sort of non-human protagonist, I think animals are the only ones that come to mind when I think of non-human protagonists. um, how
Well,
does one stay authentic? Yeah, writing tips.
you've got to know about the animal that you're writing about. I mean, you've got to know its habits, its what it eats, what it drinks, how it lives its life, and all that. Like I did, a bunch of short stories. It's titled "The Caterpillar Who Went on a Diet." Now,
Yeah.
you do have caterpillars around, and I saw one eating and getting bigger and bigger, and suddenly I thought, what if it went on a diet? Now, why would it go on a diet? And then the whole story sort of stemmed from that. But you've got to know about what you're writing. I mean, there was a magpie robin, that I met in Goa. I think I've just written about it, who used to sing different songs from different positions in the same main area. And I said, okay, it was waking me up at 4 o'clock in the morning and we were singing and then stopping and then going somewhere else and singing and stop. And I used to wonder now, okay, it's doing it fine. And in the garden, there was a pair of them. So I said, Tika. Then I read a book on bird song, and there it said that some of these male birds sing to attract a mate and to drive out other competition. So this guy was pretending to be more than one male in that same large area in order to discourage any other male who might have ideas of taking over that place. Because the outsider could say, I can fight one, but I can't fight three males because there are three different songs coming from this area. So it's completely houseful. So I won't try. So this guy was in control of an area maybe much larger than he needed, but which was very nice for his mate. He had a swimming pool, he had a lovely garden, he had three buildings, all in his control. But you have to know that, and then from there you make a story up. So in the story, I mean, I had the same Magpie Robin do this sort of a thing, and he sings a song, and this female comes there, and she says, "You sing beautifully," and all that. So he said, "Why don't you stay with me?" She's very clever. She said, "No, give me a day to think over it, and I'll come back to you." So he gets scared. He said, "Now she's gone." So he sings his first song, and he sings another song, which is even more beautiful. And sure enough, she comes back, but she's looking around, sort of, distractedly. And he said, "What's the matter? Are you feeling all right? Can I give you a worm or a grasshopper or something like that?" She says, "No, I know. I heard you sing in the morning, but then after that there was another magpie robin that sang even more beautifully. I want to go and find him." And she flies away. So that's how you convert what you observe, but you've got to observe and you've got to know about what you're writing.
I know. I mean, it's very interesting that you say that, Ranjit, because a lot of the time when we're looking at the books that come in, for the Green Literature Festival, the master list of books that come in, one of the problems, because you end up like looking at some 40, 30, 35 to 40 books. And one of the problems with animal characters is when you anthropomorphize them or give them a human voice, sometimes it's done without really research into that animal's behavior.
Yeah,
It's done very like just because, and even when it's a cat or a dog or an ordinary domestic animal that is very observable, people tend to anthropomorph anthropomorph oh god, that word. It's such a tongue twister, but basically give them these very sort of project human voice into these characters, but not really say anything about their own sort of behaviors. So what you say is very interesting. I mean, do you sort of agree that probably writers need to observe their animal characters a lot more carefully when they are constructing these narratives? And has it ever sort of bothered you that you know um, that there may be a degree of, probably, I mean, for want
yeah,
of better word, appropriation, and when you are writing these characters?
yeah. Then it sort of becomes a false narrative because
Yes.
you're not, I mean, representing the animal or whatever properly.
Yeah.
So it's got
Because
to live up to its own nature and character, what it's known for, not known for. I
yeah,
mean,
because it's just so common. You think of a children's book and all the animals are dancing about, they're singing, and suddenly you'll have
yeah,
somebody, one robin singing like Lata Mangeshkar. I mean, like, what the hell? I mean, but it's very what is actually something that I am beginning to notice and I really appreciate is, I think people are becoming aware that they can't just simply write on the environment because it's all around you. And, it has to, it involves some level of stilling yourself and actually observing and taking the trouble to research.
yeah,
And just because a leaf is shaped a certain way or is a certain color, you cannot just, sort of take that wholesale, borrow it and weave it into a very human narrative without respecting its own sort of very natural physiology. So I think that's what's really come out of what you've just said, Ranjit. Um, I think we are at the end of what has been a fantastic hour. I have really enjoyed this conversation, and it has given me much food for thought. Thank you so much, Ranjit and Shabnam, for taking out an hour of your evening today. I hope you have a fantastic weekend and all the best with your upcoming works. And hopefully, we'll have more of them in future editions of Literature Across Borders. But this has been most delightful. Thank you so much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye bye. And
Bye.
thank you to the audience who tuned in. Uh, I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.